Hi, and welcome to the WellnessFX video where we do a real broad overview of endocrine or hormone physiology. And the reason why is we're not really going to talk about any particular hormones per se as it is relevant to a blood chemistry test, but rather looking at all the possible areas of defects that can relate either to a specific hormone that is low or abnormal on a blood chemistry, or perhaps in the case that somebody is experiencing a given low hormone symptom like low testosterone symptoms or low progesterone symptoms, but the blood chemistry is showing normal levels of those hormones. So this again is just a real broad overview. So in terms of hormone production, any gland like the thyroid gland, the adrenal glands, the testes, or the ovaries are ultimately stimulated in the first place to produce their given hormones. Now this occurs largely in the hypothalamus and the pituitary. That the pituitary gland, for example, makes TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. And that tells the thyroid gland to increase its production of thyroid hormone. Other examples are like luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone in males produced by the pituitary will stimulate the testes to make more testosterone. Luteinizing hormone in females will stimulate the ovaries to make more progesterone. So in every case, the gland that's producing the hormone will be stimulated upstream, if you will, by higher order systems like the nervous system, the hypothalamus, and the pituitary. Then the gland itself makes the hormone. Now obviously when talking about possible defects, there can be issues within a given gland like the testes or the thyroid gland or the ovaries, in which case the gland doesn't actually produce adequate amounts of hormone despite the fact that it's being stimulated to do so. So let's say stimulation and production is normal. Then what can happen is in many cases hormones are converted. In the case of thyroid hormone, the thyroid gland makes the most abundant form of thyroid hormone is T4, or thyroxine. T4, as an inactive hormone, is converted to T3. So if somebody had low thyroid symptoms, it may not be a stimulation or production issue, but rather a conversion issue. Also, as we'll see in the next portion of this video, the testes produce testosterone. The ovaries, on the other hand, can produce testosterone, but produce progesterone and estrogen. Outside of the testes, once testosterone has been produced in the what's called peripheral tissues, testosterone can be converted to another more potent androgen called DHT, or dihydrotestosterone. In the case of within the ovaries themselves, testosterone is converted to estrogen, and if that conversion doesn't occur properly, then they may produce more testosterone, which also outside of the ovaries can be converted into DHT. So there can be issues with conversion anytime somebody's experiencing either low hormones symptoms, or maybe a hormone is abnormal on a blood chemistry. Many of the hormones that we've talked about, thyroid hormone as well as all of the steroid hormones, once they're produced from their respective gland, are bound onto a transportation protein. In the case of thyroid hormone, it binds to thyroid binding globulin. And in the case of sex hormones, for example, they bind onto sex hormone binding globulin. Or cortisol binds onto cortisol binding protein, or cortisol binding globulin. So you can see that this could be another potential area of defect. That let's say somebody produces too much of these binding globulins or binding proteins, that effectively reduces the amount of free hormone that can actually get into the cell and do its thing. So another possible area of defect, either if somebody has abnormal hormones on a blood chemistry or is experiencing low hormone symptoms, can be because of binding. Now ultimately, if everything's working well and the hormones are being produced, they're bound properly, they're not being over or under converted anywhere, and this goes really beyond the scope of this training as well as any commercial labs that are available today. But understand that ultimately, for this hormone to do what that hormone does in the body, it has to bind onto a cellular receptor. This receptor can be on the cell membrane, it can be within the cytosol, or it can even be on the nucleus. If the receptor for some reason is not working properly, somebody can have a perfect hormonal profile on their blood chemistry, but it be experiencing low hormone symptoms for that given hormone. And just to give you a quick example, the nuclear receptor for thyroid hormone needs vitamin A in order to work properly. So if somebody has low vitamin A, it may be that their thyroid hormone receptors are not working properly and experiencing low thyroid symptoms despite having completely normal thyroid hormone physiology. And it goes well beyond what we can talk about here, but if binding of the receptor works well within the cell itself, The nucleus makes new proteins, usually in response, or tells the ribosomes to make new proteins in response to a given hormone. And that's essentially called transcription, translation, and then protein synthesis. So this is within a cell. If for some reason it's not working properly and everything else is working perfectly, that somebody can experience normal hormone profile in a blood chemistry, but low hormone symptoms because within the cell, things just aren't working properly. Again, well beyond the scope of what we can talk about or that's available for testing, but to just understand that people can experience low hormone symptoms despite a normal panel, and it may not just be in their head like a lot of practitioners like to say. The last thing to mention is many of the hormones are produced and then cleared out of the body if they're not being used by the cells. Now, clearance for many of these hormones occurs primarily in the liver in terms of detoxifying and metabolizing these hormones, and they can be excreted through bile in the digestive tract or via the kidneys or in some cases even in sweat. But understand that this could be an area of defect as well. Let's say, for example, an individual has fairly normal hormones, but they read online about a liver detoxification program and how great that is for health, and they self-prescribe and go on a liver detoxification program. What they can do is actually metabolize and clear out some of those hormones that were normal in them, and now it shows up as low. If that's the case, usually via negative feedback, the body will increase the amount of production of hormones, but it may be that when they did the blood chemistry, if they did a liver detoxification program and had low hormones, that it was because they were actually clearing them out faster than their body could compensate and make more hormones. The other one, which I've personally found to be fairly common today, is an inability to clear some of these hormones, that the liver is not detoxifying and metabolizing these appropriately. And what happens is they may have normal or maybe even a little bit high levels of hormones on their blood chemistry, but because of high levels of hormones, just about any hormone, if it's elevated, can cause a downregulation of the receptors and therefore low hormone symptoms. So for example, the classic one that everybody knows about is insulin resistance. That there's so much insulin circulating in the body that the insulin receptors start to downregulate and they actually can't metabolize glucose and get it into the cell the way that they should. So in clearance issues, if somebody has normal or even a little bit high hormones but are experiencing low hormone symptoms, it may be because of excess hormones, because it's not being cleared, causing downregulation of the receptors and therefore low hormone symptoms despite a relatively normal panel. So those are some areas of defect that can take place with hormones. That perhaps the pituitary is not stimulating the production. Perhaps within the gland itself, it's not actually producing the hormones correctly. Maybe it's either under or over converting to different hormones. Maybe there's an issue with binding, either too much binding globulin or too low binding globulin. Let's just call this the cellular receptor in response to a hormone, or how it's actually metabolized and cleared out of the body. Now in the next part of this video, we'll take a real quick look at the cascade or pathway of steroid hormones so you can see where some of these glands are actually producing these hormones as well as some of the conversion issues that can take place. So here's a real quick overview of how the adrenal glands, the testes, and the ovaries actually produce and release their given hormones. Now, all of these are referred to as steroid hormones because they're based off of a sterol molecule which turns out to be cholesterol. So what essentially happens is picture surrounding this is the ovary, a testes, or the adrenal gland tissue. Each of these glands actually take up or trap cholesterol. Now it's said that the preferred version of cholesterol for steroid hormone synthesis is LDL cholesterol. But it has been shown that HDL cholesterol can be used for synthesis of the steroid hormones, as well as what's called de novo synthesis of cholesterol, that within these organs and tissues themselves, they can actually synthesize cholesterol. They don't necessarily need to take it from the bloodstream, and they can produce their respective hormones just from their own cholesterol production within each individual cell of those given glands. Now, understand that really what's taking place here is conversion of a cholesterol molecule into another molecule that closely resembles cholesterol, and that enzymes are in between every single one of these conversions. And we're not going to go into the enzymes because it's not necessarily clinically relevant, but understand that in the adrenal glands, for example, they have the enzymes to be able to take cholesterol and to turn it into another hormone called pregnenolone. Now, the adrenal glands can make, for example, DHEA, so that means that within the adrenal glands, they also contain the enzyme to convert pregnenolone to DHEA. Over here, the adrenal glands can also produce aldosterone and cortisol. So in the adrenal cortex, of which there are 3 layers, and each layer produces its own hormone, let's say, for example, in the outermost layer of the adrenal glands that produces aldosterone, that particular layer contains the enzymes in order to take cholesterol and eventually turn it into aldosterone. Now, the middle layer of the cortex produces cortisol. So the middle layer of the cortex has the enzymes necessary to convert cholesterol ultimately into cortisol. The innermost layer of the cortex of the adrenal gland produces not only DHEA but some of the other androgens, and therefore contains the enzymes in order to produce those. Now, let's say, for example, we were talking about the testes. The testes do not make progesterone, aldosterone, or cortisol. So in the testes actually contain the enzymes to convert cholesterol to pregnenolone, pregnenolone to DHEA, DHEA to androstenedione, and then androstenedione to testosterone. Notice here that testosterone can be converted into estradiol, and testosterone can also be converted to dihydrotestosterone, or DHT. This happens outside of the testes. So outside of the testes contains the enzymes aromatase and 5-alpha reductase to convert testosterone to another downstream hormone, but the testes themselves do not contain those particular enzymes. And again, if we were talking about the ovaries, you know that the ovaries produce estradiol, for example, so they contain all these enzymes plus aromatase to actually produce estradiol. And over here, they produce progesterone, but not aldosterone or cortisol, so you know that the ovaries don't contain these particular enzymes, and only the ones to turn cholesterol into progesterone. Also, progesterone can sort of jump to the other side here and be converted to androstenedione. So this is proposed here just as an understanding as to why somebody may have abnormal of certain hormones on their particular blood chemistry. For example, if a woman comes in and she has high testosterone on her blood chemistry, that's likely coming from the ovaries. But why? Is perhaps that woman lacks the aromatase that can adequately convert testosterone to estradiol. Or, for example, in a male. Let's say a male comes in with low testosterone. There's a variety of reasons for this, but if a male has low testosterone, perhaps it's because that within the testes they lack the enzyme to convert androstenedione into testosterone. Or if a male has low testosterone, perhaps outside of the tissues, it's because it's being over-converted to DHT or over-converted into estradiol. So, excuse me. So this pathway is proposed just as so you understand not only where these hormones originally come from in the first place, but that if somebody comes in with either too high or too low of a given hormone, that perhaps it's not that particular hormone that's high or low, but rather the under or over conversion to other hormones. So I hope this video on just a real broad overview of endocrine physiology was helpful in really being able to critically evaluate the blood chemistry results for specific hormones. It's very easy to see low testosterone and say to a man that you need hormone replacement therapy. But that may not be actually getting to the cause of the problem. That maybe the problem exists somewhere in this pathway with over or under conversion, or perhaps in the previous portion of this video, it had to do with binding or clearance or perhaps stimulation even in the first place. I hope you found this video helpful, and I'll see you in another video.